Welcome back to the Story of Liberty. This is your host, John Bona. You've heard that verse in Matthew 5:14. For you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. You know, on January 11th, 1989, in his farewell address to the nation, he said, I've spoken of the shining city all my political life. And how stands the city on this winter night? After 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true to the granite ridge, and her glow has held no matter what storm. And she's still a beacon, still a magnet for all those who must have liberty, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurting through the darkness toward home. That was Ronald Reagan. He spent most of his political life speaking of the shining city upon a hill. He took the phrase from John Winthrop, who in the 17th century described the United States from his Puritan perspective as a city upon a hill. John Winthrop took this phrase from Christ the Lord's Sermon on the Mount. People, Christians, are spoken of as the light of the world and a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. When I hear these words, my mind always goes immediately to Ronald Reagan. I guess it's because I grew up with Ronald Reagan during his presidency, and I hold him in great admiration. And as we know, as time goes by, we forget the history. We forget the story of liberty. It could be that the Winthrop reference is so old and obscure. Either way, it's a fitting topic for our discussion today. But there is no question that Christ said we are to be salt and light. You look at those verses, you are the salt of the earth. And if the salt loses its saltness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. Scripture goes on to say, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. There it is, folks. Get engaged, Christians, in politics, films, business, media, local government across this great land. There's many opportunities. We can be a shining city on a hill once again if you do. Dr. Marshall Foster explains over 400 years ago the conflict between evil and good, liberty and tyranny was red hot. Tyranny was at the front door again by the king of that time, James I, and his son Charles I, who ruled England. They were brutal tyrants. But what these kings did not know is that they were oppressing a people armed with the most powerful weapon in history, the Bible, the English Bible. For 1,000 years, the Bible had been hidden from the people. It was made illegal to own one. But the Bible, the Geneva Bible, was printed in 1560 and made available. By the 17th century, thousands upon thousands of families were reading their own Bibles and discovering the eternal principles of liberty. As a result, several generations of Englishmen rose up and stood against the tyrants, the Stuart kings. When Charles ascended to the throne, he had the arrogance of a Roman emperor. He thought he had the divine right. He thought he was God on earth. He declared martial law. He suspended all the rights of all the individuals. He denied the right of Parliament even to set taxes. He became the law. He imprisoned people without cause or trial. These were all heinous violations of the great Magna Carta, the greatest English charter of liberty. His armed agents were sent throughout England, demanding exorbitant taxes from the hard-working people. If the taxpayer declined, he was arrested and sent to the dungeons of London. There, the king's inquisitors, in his star chamber in the Tower of London, would torture until they discovered the taxpayers' assets. Perhaps the worst thing the king did was he persecuted anyone who didn't agree with his religious views, his unbiblical religious views, I should say. He forced his views on every individual in England. In public displays, he would cut off the ears and slit the nostrils of liberty-loving Christians, preachers and the like, writers. He would then impose heavy fines and imprison these innocent Christians in rodent-infested dungeons. But there was a turning point in January 30, 1637. 3 prisoners were locked down in the pillory in London before a huge crowd. These men included a Puritan minister, Dr. John Bastwick, a physician. What was their crime? They had written some pamphlets disagreeing with the king's religious views. The sheriff began by branding the men with red hot irons on the forehead. Then he mutilated them by cutting off their ears and condemned them to a lifetime in the dungeon. Meanwhile, John Bastwick's wife approached the pillory. Standing on a stool, she kissed her disfigured, bleeding husband and placed his shredded ears in her handkerchief. The people were commanded to mock the prisoners, but instead they treated the men as martyrs, as heroes, and they threw flowers at their feet, and the men were marched back to the dungeon. The people were finally awakening. The ruthless tyrant king and his minions, their evil actions finally aroused the Christians. The Christians could no longer tolerate burnings or mutilations for matters of conscience or a religious view. The Parliament then passed the Petition of Right, which declared the liberties of the people and prohibited the king from infringing on these liberties. This document ultimately led the way to the English Bill of Rights, and it became a major inspiration for our own Declaration of Independence and Constitution. Also, the American Bill of Rights in 1789, which even today restrains political tyrants from usurping our individual rights. These persecutions drove tens of thousands of liberty-loving believers to follow the pilgrims to the New World, to New England, where they laid the foundation of the world's most biblically sound nation, a city on a hill. The first leader of this great migration was John Winthrop, a devout Christian lawyer, a judge, and a businessman. John spent his personal fortune both to help finance the voyage and to provide for the nearly starving settlers at their arrival in Boston in 1630. John Winthrop, in his vision, he called on his fellow believers to remember that they were under a great commission and in covenant with God. He said, "For we must consider that we shall be like a city on a hill. The eyes of all the people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and byword, a disgrace throughout the world." John Winthrop was elected governor, and the creation of a Christian commonwealth was an unprecedented success. Over the next decades, thousands of believers and Christian leaders came to join the city on a hill to help create Christian colonies in New England. These people wrote their own covenants, their own agreements and constitutions from the grassroots up. developing independent, self-governing towns. You know, Alexis de Tocqueville said something about that. He recognized that the key to American liberty was the development of the independent town, the small city on the hill, as opposed to the top-down rule in most of Europe, and is now, as we see, coming to America. As he says, the township was organized before the county before the state before the union. All of this hands-on involvement by hundreds of thousands of individuals over many decades was the basis for our Declaration of Independence and constitutional period. America's city on the hill, it can be reclaimed. One family, one town, from the bottom up. Then America once again will shine with the light of Christian love, Christian compassion. The darkness will be obliterated by the light. Our nation can become a city on a hill.